Hello, my name is Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt, with another entry in a series on cinematic adaptations of important novels. As is my custom, I will focus my attention on just a few threads of the story in what I hope proves to be a successful inducement to both read and watch the titles I discuss. In the playfully named short story The Lady in the Looking Glass, A Reflection, Virginia Woolf describes the whimsical reveries of a woman who, sitting in a friend's drawing room, creatively recreates her friend once that friend has disappeared from view. A half hour earlier, her companion stepped beyond the reach of the hanging mirror that caught her reflection as she strolled along a grass path, basket at the ready, into the backyard. Once out of sight of the looking glass, the narrator builds a host of romantic possibilities atop which she considers relatively uninteresting facts about her acquaintance, that she's of advanced age, wealthy, and unmarried. Perhaps the many cabinets populating this house, collected from exotic locales around the world, contain in their numerous small drawers a collection of passionate letters from former lovers. What if her friend contains hidden depths, is, quote, filled with tenderness and regret at the recollection of unrealized possibilities? Might it sadden her to cut an overgrown tree branch because it introduces death prematurely, reminding her of her own mortality and the futility and evanescence of things? Such possibilities seem more than feasible to our narrator. They seem quite likely, until, that is, the mirror reintroduces the woman herself. Before long, the slow-moving figure returns into view, her image growing gradually larger in the looking glass as she returns, the hard truth of her actual self completely erasing the narrator's fancies. Quote, "Here was the woman herself. She stood naked in that pitiless light, and there was nothing. Isabella was perfectly empty. She had no thoughts. She had no friends. She cared for nobody." In story after story, Woolf's female characters encounter reflective surfaces that erase romance, make demands, and inspire cold and unflattering self-examination. They force a confrontation with aspects of reality each character might otherwise ignore or cover over with their imagination. Mirrors do not provide exciting portals into fantasy and adventure for Woolf, as they do for Lewis Carroll's Tiny Alice, nor do they provide a helpful occasion for touching up one's appearance or offering a welcoming invitation to introspection. Not at all. Remember that moment in Disney's animated Snow White in which the evil queen gazes into her magical mirror and is told that she's no longer the most beautiful woman in her kingdom? Yeah, that. With the notable exception of gender-swapping Orlando, who is remarkably comfortable in her own skin, Woolf's fictional women curl up inside when they peer into a looking glass. It's as if each woman sees, laid over the surface of the reflective coating, a translucent overlay of what she should look like, a topographical facial map in color that reminds her either of her own appearance when she was younger or of some other exemplary ideal of beauty that she comes nowhere close to matching. In Woolf's novel The Waves, seeing a reflection in a mirror distresses the teenage Ginny, who compares her wide lips, close eyes, and visible gums to the beautiful features of her friend Susan. The suicidal Rhoda hates with a passion those looking glasses that force her to confront her real face. Mrs. Ramsay, of the novel To the Lighthouse, slips easily into a black dress for dinner and then vacillates between wearing different necklaces suggested by two of her children, quote, looking at her neck and shoulders, but avoiding her face in the glass. If the 50-year-old woman were to look at herself squarely, she'd probably perform the same negative assessment as the middle-aged Clarissa Dalloway in Woolf's previous novel. In Woolf's most famous work, our hero thinks herself shriveled, aged, breastless, after learning that her husband was invited to a luncheon when she was not, and soon thereafter looks into a mirror to fabricate a false, seemingly coherent and socially acceptable identity. Admittedly, Clarissa has an advantage over some, a quote, delicate pink face, looks back at her with slightly pursed lips that give her face point, the kind of contour that holds others' attention. The vision of a beautiful, put-together self, which she will wear at her party that evening, however, is a lie. Quote, that was herself, when some effort, some call on her to be herself, drew the parts together. She alone knew how different, how incompatible, and composed so for the world only into one center, one diamond, one woman who sat in her drawing room and made a meeting point, a radiancy, no doubt, in some dull lives, a refuge, never showing a sign of all the other sides of her, faults, jealousies, vanities, suspicions. Mrs. Clarissa Dalloway uses a mirror, that is, to deceive, to pretend to be okay, so that friends and a host of young people seeking her advice can briefly feel, in her presence, renewed. As is the case in much of her other fiction, the men in Mrs. Dalloway don't have quite the same trouble with mirrors. Peter Walsh, excited to be in love, sees himself, quote, reflected in the plate glass window of a motor car manufacturer in Victoria Street, and thinks, there he was, this fortunate man himself. The self-assured and criminally inept medical practitioner Dr. Holmes enters the room of a patient, quote, large, fresh-colored, handsome, flicking his boots, looking in the glass. He brushed it all aside. Headaches, sleeplessness, fears, dreams, nerve symptoms, and nothing more. Why the sharp difference between female and male experiences with mirrors? I mean, I, though a boy, was morbidly preoccupied with my pimply face, thin hair, skinny limbs, and high hairline in middle school and high school. It would probably be unfair, though, to generalize from my own experience. In Western culture, women face standards much more exacting than those facing men. Plenty of studies have demonstrated that men feel more confident about most facets of their identity than do women, even when those same studies demonstrate greater academic competence and intellectual ability in the women examined. There's another reason that Woolf genders our experience of reflective surfaces, an explanation she boldly provides in one of the autobiographical essays written towards the end of her life. In the first essay of a collection entitled A Sketch of the Past, Woolf considers why she began feeling shame when looking into mirrors around the age of 6. Perhaps, she thinks, it was because she and her sister Vanessa had chosen to be tomboys who cared nothing about appearances, and she was breaking their unspoken code. Maybe it had something to do with a puritanical streak inherited from her grandfather, a man sadly convinced that pleasure was not a gift from God, but a temptation to be avoided at all costs. Virginia and her sisters Vanessa and Stella were all classically attractive like their mother, and her young self may have felt guilt about recognizing any semblance of beauty in her own countenance. She regularly felt rapture in the presence of other women's beauty, but deep shame when thinking about her own body. This shame she finally traces in a heartbreaking revelation to being sexually molested as a child by an older half-brother, George Duckworth. Tragically, we inhabit a world where some men regularly abuse the power they wield in personal and professional spaces alike. Whether or not inappropriate pressures culminate in outright assault, the mirror provides far too many women with reminders of their vulnerability. This is a truth Woolf repeatedly brings before her readers, making its representation in film a prime consideration for me whenever I contemplate a cinematic translation of her work. The 1997 film adaptation of Mrs. Dalloway, directed by Marlene Goris from a screenplay by Eileen Atkins, does make some changes I liked. Though inserting more physical interactions to titillate audiences can feel like a cop-out that plays to the lowest common denominator, the decision here to add a couple scenes of Clarissa and Peter kissing, in addition to dramatizing the famous kiss with Sally Seton, helps underscore how divided Clarissa's heart truly is. The two young women's youthful optimism is caught in the declaration that always we'll do everything together, we'll change the world, lines added by the film, while holding hands and running excitedly into the distance. At this moment, I think their intimacy recalls that of Diana Barry and Anne of Green Gables in Lucy Maud Montgomery's novel. The same physical shorthand also clarifies how much comfort the shell-shocked ex-soldier Septimus Smith sometimes finds in his wife's presence. In the film, the fear and anxiety haunting him throughout the day dissipate for a short but powerful moment as he and Rezia kiss and hold one another. These added strands may help the viewer trace character intimacy in the adaptation, but the film changes the color and patterning of other threads altogether, altering key elements of Virginia Woolf's vision. As in the novel, Peter stands in front of a reflective surface confidently, but Clarissa does the same with no sign of unease. Her self-assessment, as she stands in front of a full-length mirror in her bedroom, both in the morning and evening, betrays no discomfort with her aging appearance and no sign of the constraint that marks her efforts in the novel to gather herself into a coherent, unified whole for the benefit of others. Atkins' screenplay uses narrative voiceover elsewhere to express the related anxieties of Woolf's various characters, capturing one of the modernist period's most famous examples of stream of consciousness. The Clarissa of the film does live much of her day thinking about the past, a preoccupation conveyed through Vanessa Redgrave's voiceovers, but her nostalgia here plays more as wistfulness than the desperate longing we see in the novel. Life provides reliable pleasure whenever this version of Clarissa interacts with servants, her husband, and her friends. True, she has doubts about the success of her evening party, as in the novel, and believes, wrongly, that someone else's suicide represents some sort of victory, but she returns to her party in good spirits. The film provides the tale an ending absent from the novel, in which Clarissa mingles comfortably with her old friend Sally and even dances with Peter. This Clarissa is victorious, a hero in control of her destiny who can look at herself, both literally and figuratively, without shrinking. Michael Cunningham's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Hours, demonstrates the author's considerable knowledge of Woolf's diaries and letters, familiarity with Woolf's life that allow him to dexterously, brilliantly reposition assorted pieces of the novel Mrs. Dalloway in ways I won't get into here. Suffice it to say that The Hours weaves together one day in the life of Virginia Woolf as she's writing Mrs. Dalloway, one day in the life of a modern-day Clarissa, whose close friend compares her to Woolf's fictional Clarissa, and a single day in the life of a 1950s housewife who escapes her family's needs by reading Woolf's book. Cunningham's 1998 novel, published a year after the Mrs. Dalloway film, provides significant mirror moments rather late in each of its three plot lines. His Virginia Woolf, who has stolen away from her husband and their busy printing press in efforts to hop on a train for London, catches her, quote, fragmented golden reflection in the gold name of the butcher shop suspended on the glass over a lamb's carcass, prompting her to consider running to the station and thereby, quote, escape some sort of catastrophe. When, moments later, Leonard catches up to her by the shop window, they are together, quote, reflected brokenly in the golden letters. However they respond to life's overwhelming, fragmenting stresses in the days to come, the book contends that they will do so as partners. Mrs. Laura Brown, the suburban wife of a World War II soldier whom she married because she felt he deserved a wife like herself in light of the trauma he had survived overseas, now finds herself stifled by family responsibilities. Though she experiences intense moments of passion for her young son and earnest care for her husband, she also feels a growing sense of suffocation that prompts suicidal thoughts. At a pivotal moment, she contemplates while looking into the medicine cabinet mirror and assessing its abundant supply of sleeping pills, quote, how wonderful it might be to no longer matter, to no longer worry or struggle or fail. The contemporary Clarissa and Sally, living together in modern Manhattan, also experience profound confrontations with their reflections. Sally frowns at a flower stand while staring into mirrored tiles, which bounce back her gray-haired, sharp-faced, sallow face. And she wonders how she grew so old. Clarissa, having sat down to confront a visitor whom she has long considered an evil monster, sees their shared silhouette dimly reflected in a darkened glass door and wonders whether a recently deceased friend found pleasure in his final moments equal to the pain of dying. Stephen Daldry's film, The Hours, released 4 years after the novel, achieves remarkable thematic parity with Woolf's original story, capturing her fourth novel's sustained mix of gloom, punctuated by short and sharp flashes of ecstasy. Though twice removed from the Mrs. Dalloway of 1925, Daldry's film of Cunningham's novel, from a screenplay by David Hare, nails the significance of mirrors even more than Cunningham's book, in a surprising way. Though, once again, as in the Mrs. Dalloway film, our middle-aged Clarissa does not balk when glancing at her own image, it's only because the modern Clarissa is a more evolved variant of the character. This Clarissa expresses the full range of her emotions instead of bottling them up, and on this memorable day, recalibrates a few relationships in a healthy way. Both the Virginia Woolf character and the 50s housewife, however, whose shared discontent and depression align with Woolf's own well-documented mental health problems, experience moments with a mirror that recall the unease that pursues Woolf throughout her life. Nicole Kidman's version of Woolf rises from bed with a slight scowl that barely budges throughout the film, an aggressive posture towards life that settles into place while standing before a large mirror in the early morning hours. Additionally, Hare's screenplay moves Laura Brown's own encounter with her reflection from the back of the novel to the opening of the film, a choice that more effectively signals that angst which chases her throughout the day. When she looks into the mirror, she's also reaching for the sleeping pills that could end her life. It's a powerful decision on the filmmaker's part, an alteration that hammers home the severity of a roaring, barely veiled discontent, invisible to her husband, but glaringly obvious to her young little son. What do you think? Does The Hours, in either incarnation, book or film, successfully render other significant elements of Virginia Woolf's original novel, Mrs. Dalloway?